Lipetsk region, a region in the center of the European part of Russia. The region is located in close proximity to Moscow, and the country's most important transport arteries pass through it: federal highways M4 Don and P22 Caspian. The ports of St. Petersburg, the Black Sea, and the EU border are 1,000 kilometers away. The average annual freight turnover of railway transport is 8,600 million tons. Lipetsk region is one of the leading regions of the Russian Federation in terms of investment attractiveness. According to the Quality of Life rating, the region is among the top 10. There are excellent opportunities for implementing projects in the fields of industry, agriculture, and food. Many well-known companies appreciated the advantages of investment opportunities and found a reliable and successful partner in the Lipetsk region. We provide investors with a large selection of technologically equipped platforms, special economic zone, industrial parks, brownfield, technology parks. In industrial and production clusters, there are 11 directions for creating clusters on the territory of the Lipetsk region. The industry of the region produces competitive products exported to more than 120 countries of the world: Italy, Germany, Ukraine, China, Poland, Netherlands, Brazil. We are one of the first regions in Russia to launch an export accelerator. We have something to offer the investor. The investor receives project support, state support, tax benefits, customs benefits, qualified workers and management personnel, developed banking infrastructure, and modern technologies. Our experience in working with projects, the speed and quality of their execution and implementation, a comfortable environment for investors, all this guarantees the success of your business. Lipetsk region is open for your business. Department of Investment and Innovation of the Lipetsk region.
Добрый день, коллеги! Мы рады приветствовать вас на третьем ежегодном международном.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Welcome to the third International Forum Responsible Investment in the CIS and Black Sea region. For the second consecutive year, we are going online, but this gives us some benefits as well, as everyone has an opportunity to ask questions and to watch repeatedly the record of the conference. I hope that those who attended the first part liked it. Those who did not will have a chance to watch the record. First, a couple of technical comments. You can listen to simultaneous translation by selecting the button looking like a globe and select the required language. Mostly we have Russian speakers. That is why I'm going to speak in Russian and ask questions in English to English speakers only. This year, we're very interactive, close to our weekly webinars. Everyone, the list of participants is transparent. Please have your mics on mute to so that you will not disturb the speakers. I would like to thank German-Russian Chamber of Foreign Trade, and now we are going to speak about investments and transformation of regions. We are going to talk how to assess SG progress. We're going to cover business and regional interaction in the context of ESG transformation, as well as opportunities for regions and municipalities to use financial instruments for sustainable development. And I will start with a couple of introduction slides. The first speaker will be Shankini. a co-founder of CEO Climate Bond Initiative, Dmitriy Aksakov from VEB.RF, Eugenia Loktionova from Lipetsk region, Alexey Parabuchev from Moscow Agency of Innovations, and finally Andrey Betin from Nizhny Novgorod region. As I said, we start with an introduction to lead you in the discussion. Sustainable regional development provides for close cooperation between regional authorities and business investors to decrease ESG risks, which include environmental pollution, climate change, scarcity of natural resource, nature protection, public health, and social issues. ESG opportunities are energy efficiency, renewable energy, new technologies, circular economy, and incentives for responsible finance and investment. ESG responsible business is a strategic partner for the region, which reduces the negative impact on the environment, transits to clean technologies, invests in local communities, social sphere and infrastructure, employs locals, and makes a contribution in the regional economic development. ESG responsible region means integration in the ESG agenda, funding for environmental and social programs, integration of ESG factors into state procurement, as well as creation of priorities for ESG responsible companies and opting out dirty industries. You see 3 levels of regional analysis detailization: ESG ranking of regions, ESG rating of the region, and a regional ESG strategy. We are going to get back to this ranking at the end of this conference. First time we ranked regions. Regions were hardly interested as they were not aware of the urgency of the topic, but with the increasing number of regions undergoing ESG ranking, we were supported by the Nizhny Novgorod region to launch open consultations on their ranking methodology. We want to that our methodology is open and that ranked regions are aware of which criteria are applied. Next slide, please. This is about importance of ESG ratings for regions in the long term, which we've already discussed. This is top-level rating of the region based on Lipetsk case. It is unique in terms of constantly keep an eye on the ESG ranking, and all their reports are accessible on our website with ESG assessment of the region. And they also use ESG as a tool of communication with investors and invitation of new investors to the region. One more thing to note is motivation for implementing an ESG strategy. Normally, regions implement strategies in response to the regulatory framework, global trends, or stakeholders' demand. And following a ranking methodology discussion, I would like to invite you to our regular webinars. And the first Wednesday, we will have a webinar on regional ranking. So I'd like to give a floor to John Kidney, who is a co-founder of Climate Bond Initiatives. Now I'm going to switch to the English language.
In your opinion, apart from climate CBI certification or compliance with national taxonomies, what other credibility signals do responsible investors in CIS and Black Sea region countries look for?
Well, behind that, and my apologies for speaking in English, my Russian is not good. But behind that issue of what investors are interested in is what are the risks they're concerned about now. And globally, and in Russia, investors are now concerned about what we call transition risk. This is the extent to which our economies, our societies are going to shift in the next few years, partly in response to climate change. I mean, as you know, in Siberia, we've had terrible heat waves and fires raging. We have unseasonal, incredibly high temperatures across the Arctic in summer, last couple of summers. Climate change impacts are starting to be felt. But also because all the world's major economies now, including Russia, have now made strong commitments to 2060, 2050 and 2030 targets for emissions reductions, there's a lot of implications in that change. To give you an example, China's shift to low carbon and low emissions is partly behind its drive to grow electric vehicles. We are going to see a massive growth in electric vehicles and a consequent depression in demand for oil going forward in the next few years. We're already seeing this in Germany, where last year, 50% of all fleet cars sold were electric, not oil. The change is well underway. Now, from an investor perspective, whoa, things are changing. How do I keep ahead of this? What are the kind of investments that are going to be low risk going forward and are going to be better for the sustainability of my portfolio is a question that's being asked everywhere. Green investments are those because they address the policy risk. They're investments that are less likely to be impacted by policy changes coming through. And the best description of green investments is in the VEB, the Russian Development Bank taxonomy, that Dmitriy Aksakov, I hope we'll talk about in a minute. And we congratulate Russia and the Duma for passing their regulation around taxonomy in September this year and introducing this guidance for the market about what are green investments. You can see what's there. So I'm going to say that the risks of transition, the risks of climate change are the primary driver of demand. This is also the case in Europe and in other countries around the world. The green bond market, which we work in, is now a global phenomenon. It's 135 trillion rubles in size this year. And that's a growth of 80% on the previous year. And it will grow the same again this coming year. This is the fastest growing market on the planet. And we've also seen issuance in emerging markets and in Russia about this, where the deputy mayor of Moscow tells me that with their huge domestic green bond, the story I was going to say was that in Moscow, as many of you know, the city has issued a major green bond, and using the proceeds to finance metro railways. That's a green investment, everyone. And that's a clue for the Lipids region. Anything to do with rail and metro and subway systems that might be being financed in the region or refinanced would qualify. And they got a price benefit from domestic investors. They say they got a 20 basis points reduced interest rate for the green bond as a normal Moscow bond. So what I'm saying is it's very clear that investors in CIS are keen on this just as much as investors in Europe, in Japan, in China, and in the US going forward. What are they looking for? They're looking for things that are properly green. So what would that be? Well, clearly clean energy. That's of course wind, solar. It includes hydro. Last year, the Climate Bond Certification published criteria for hydroelectricity investments that could be included. It includes rail and metro. We have criteria. The Russian railways issued 2 certified climate bonds in the European market, and they got the most extraordinary low interest rates from the European investors because of enthusiasm for the green theme. So there are opportunities internationally as well as domestically It's green buildings, very energy efficient buildings. It's industrial transition and many areas. There's a lot that could be done. If someone is able to issue a bond, they can issue a green bond. If someone is able to issue debt, they could do a green loan. Many banks around the world have now started programs of lending to the green framework, which they can later package up those loans into green bonds that the banks will issue. There's a lot that can happen here in the region, a lot.
Thank you, Sean. What is your view on harmonization of taxonomies? So you already mentioned the taxonomy issued by VEB.RF, but this is Russian taxonomy. So do you think other countries in the region should proceed with their own taxonomies, like Kazakhstan is also proposing a taxonomy? Or would the region benefit from some more or less universal taxonomy, which would be valid for a number of countries?
The more universal, the better, the easier for capital flows. But the truth is every country is going to want to have its own taxonomy. That's not a problem as long as we collaborate. So in the Kazakhstan economy, we've been advising them. We would encourage them to work very closely with the Russian taxonomy. Call it the Kazakhstan taxonomy, but make sure it's synchronized and interoperable with the Russian taxonomy. Of course, if agreement can be made to have a CIS taxonomy, I think it's a fantastic step. That would be really good for promoting common standards around the region. I would also like to see a deeper discussion between the Russian Development Bank and the European Commission about harmonization between Europe and Russia, and also between the Chinese People's Bank of China and Russia. We have been working with the European Commission and the People's Bank of China on a common ground taxonomy between China and Europe. We published the first copy just before I had a chance to speak at a Russian Development Bank event in Glasgow early in the year. Let's do more of that kind of talking to each other, sharing knowledge and harmonizing. But that doesn't mean we don't have a national taxonomy. It's just a national taxonomy that is in line or synchronized with the rest of the world and encourages cross-border capital flows. And we're very keen to support this discussion going forward. It is a discussion. We've got to do some work on it. You're perfectly right in raising the question.
And how do you think companies from CIS region can signal better their ESG practices and green practices for European investors? We discussed in the first session the geopolitical risks and the situation in the region quite often stops investors from investing, but sustainable companies, sustainable assets and issues, they can help to overcome those barriers. So what do you see as a credible signal that company from Russia or CIS region in general or Black Sea region is sustainable and sustainable in line with the same standards as common in EU, for example?
Well, of course, the geopolitical tensions are ones that we can't deal with. Just because it's green, you don't avoid those. Except, well, the treasurer of Russian Rail said to me that when they issued their bonds in Swiss francs and euros, they found investors who are anxious about sanctions risk. I mean, Russian Rail is not under sanctions, as you know, but people are worried, investors worried, just ignored that risk when it came to green because they were so enthusiastic about the green. So it became a way to bypass the concerns for investors in the European market. It made it easier to get the interest and get access to investors. In that case, they used climate bond certification as the tool to do it. I am hoping, I'll ask Dmitry in a minute, I am hoping that we'll be able to work with the Russian Development Bank, VEB.RF, later in the year to provide training for Russian issuers on how the certification process works and how to go international if you're able to go international. I mean, of course, there's exchange rate risk. There's all sorts of reasons there can be challenges for some issuers. So we also need to be very focused on developing the domestic market, which is why that Moscow bond was so amazing for me to show the extent of demand locally. But on the international side, you need to get a confirmation that you meet the criteria in the region you are issuing. That's what climate bond certification will do in Europe. And can do in other countries. There are options, and the training that we plan to do will cover some of those options. But if you're a big company in the Lipids region and you can manage the foreign exchange risk, because issuing a Russian ruble bond in the US or Europe is a tough call because the exchange rate volatility. If you can manage the exchange risk and issue in US dollars or euros or Swiss francs or Chinese yen, Chinese yuan for that matter, then there's a lot of opportunities for you. And you really need to have a close look at it because the cost of capital in those markets is unbelievably low. And there's an arbitrage between the Russian cost of capital and say the European or the US or Japanese cost of capital that we need to play, subject to being able to manage the exchange risk. And these are difficult questions. Now, of course, look, if conflict gets worse, this might get harder. There's a lot of anxiety in Europe at the moment about tensions with Ukraine. We know it's in the media. Of course, if something becomes a mess, it makes life harder for a while. All I can tell you is the appetite for green is far greater than the appetite for vanilla or plain everywhere in the world. So if you want to try and place a bond or raise debt and you can do green, you are mad not to do it.
Thank you, Sean. So you wanted to have a dialogue with Dmitry. Dmitry is the next speaker, so I think he will support you. And we're very excited to hear about the educational course. We also promote all educational initiatives in field of sustainability because, of course, it's a new dynamic in area where people require more knowledge as quickly as possible and of good quality. So that sounds great.
Svetlana, thank you very much. Sean, it's wonderful to see you. I think given that the majority of our audience is Russian speaking, I'm going to speak to Russian for my remarks.
Since Sean was speaking about training initiatives and about the need to tell the potential issuers about the steps that need to be taken in order to issue green bonds, I'd like to say that we have made it on a bilateral level with an uncountable number of potential issuers. We have discussed it face-to-face over Zoom or other platforms, but of course we need to have a much wider outreach. We need to tell this to the entire market, to the potential participants, how they can join this. So we are now in dialogue with potential educational institutions in order to organize large training courses that can be provided for a large audience, also online, in order to learn how to issue green bonds. But in continuing this discussion, I completely agree with Sean that green bonds are extremely in extremely high demand on international capital markets, and this instrument is becoming more popular in Russia too. When we talk about regions, Moscow went on the market with a 70 billion issue, which was very much welcomed by the investors. I know that Moscow is preparing a second issue targeting primarily private investors, and this sets a very good example for other regions, because a number of other regions have contacted us asking whether they could issue green bonds, what kind of projects could be funded by these bonds. And there are many projects that are implemented in the regions that are for which green bonds are applicable. There is development of electric transportation. It's not only electric buses, but it's streetcars, it's trolley buses, it's development of infrastructure. It's also sewage, it's water supply, it's municipal waste management, and all falls into green project category. But I will also say a couple of words about the taxonomy. Taxonomy is a range of activities that can be funded through green financial instruments. There is also a government decision which was drafted by VEB with the Minister of Economic Development. So we now have an official mechanism in Russia that makes it possible to issue green bonds or raise green loans when this document was developed, we tried to make it as similar to international peers as possible. We looked at the EU taxonomy, and this document will be continuously improved. We understand that there are things that we overlooked, that this document will need to be updated, expanded, and we're already working on its second iteration. And we are also talking to international exchanges in order to make our standards an entry point to sustainable development sectors at these exchanges. If we look at the London Stock Exchange or the Luxembourg Exchange, we will see that if an issue of green bonds is verified with the climate bond initiatives, it falls into the sustainable development sector. So we want the Russian taxonomy be able to do the same. And one more idea from the financial engineering sector, Sean and I were talking about green bonds before that. These bonds are issued to fund specific projects, user proceeds bonds, so-called user proceeds bonds. But corporate borrowers are now looking for sustainability-linked bonds. So bonds that are attached to achieving certain sustainability parameters. I know that sovereign borrowers are now looking into these instruments. These bonds are not issued to fund a specific project,
в области устойчивого развития.
but rather to improve certain sustainability parameters. So a company may say that we promise that by 2025, our CO2 emissions by a ton of our product will be reduced by 10% versus now. If we achieve that, then the cost of borrowing and coupon payments will be down by 0.25%. If this parameter is not achieved, then the cost of borrowing will be increased by 0.25%, for example. So the question is now about what KPIs could be used in order to issue such bonds. And I think the next logical step will be to use this instrument by regions, because as far as I understand, the regional budgets work to issue bonds. They cannot issue bonds to fund the specific projects. They can issue general purpose bonds, but then they can set forth those sustainability KPIs. That is quite possible. So it's important to identify tangible and achievable KPIs so that they are understood by the investors, and then such bonds have very high potential. And in terms of KPIs that can be used by the regions, I would like to speak a little bit about the quality of life index that was developed by VEB. There are 12 parameters in there. It's housing, it's mobility, it's education, it's healthcare. All these parameters are within the sustainability sector. They're all calculated based on specific statistical data, which have already been collected for 117 Russian cities. So theoretically, this index could be used to issue sustainability linked bonds. That'll be the end of my speech. Thank you. Thank you, Dmitry. We will later in this session, we will discuss regional ESG strategies and about the KPIs that they can use and what kind of instruments can be issued based on those KPIs. So there'll be a very good investment tool for the regions. So with that, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker from a region, Eugenia Loktionova, Head of Innovation Department in the Lipetsk region.
Участники форума, спасибо вам большое, что позволили нам выступить на значимом событии. Ну, на самом деле тема новая, для нас уже не новая. Действительно, группа компаний первыми включились в этот процесс. И на текущий момент именно они являются локомотивами в этом направлении. Так, например, крупнейшие предприятия, расположенные на территории области, и глобальную программу уделяют большой ресурс для реализации развития. Липецкая область. Прошу прощения, я не могу демонстрировать экран.
I'm sorry, I cannot demonstrate my screen.
Евгения, можете говорить, пожалуйста, чуть-чуть ближе к микрофону?
Please, Evgenia, speak closer to the mic. The sound is bad from time to time.
И проверьте, пожалуйста, что у вас выбран корректный.
And please check that you've selected the right channel. Lipetsk region is appealing for the investment community, and we are happy to say that we have the most modern thing, the trust of investors. As major international companies are present in our region, including Germany, France, Belgium, and many other companies. We couldn't stay aloof, and we had but to change according to investors' anticipations. There is no single ESG metrics for the regions, and RAEX made a big step forward assigning ratings and ranking the regions. I think this is very useful as it helps regions to understand where they are and where they are going. Where the single region who updates who have updated their its rating for the fourth consecutive year, in accordance with the methodology developed by RAEX, and we're moving forward. We are hoping that this year we will approve a development strategy for the region till 2030, which will be based on the ESG metrics. A bit more about our vision of ESG. ESG means that both business, government, and government share ESG values. They collaborate and they share ESG values with general public. I'd like to show you some practical steps taken in this direction in the region. We favor green investors in our region who pay more attention to sustainable development of their companies. We monitor environmental status of the region, and our focus is prevention rather than imposing penalties. We have the largest special economic zone, which is an industrial platform with benefits, and our objective for 3 years is to make it a green area. This implies that in 2018, we started a network management center which monitors engineering utilities of both platforms, as well as remote control of infrastructure facilities. This allowed to save about 30% in energy loss. We are also keep an eye on the companies present in the economic zone, making sure that they use both green processes and green materials for construction. A couple of dozens European countries, European companies are present in the region, and we welcome those who share ESG principles with us. Both special economic zone residents and those beyond it. All the residents of the zone engage in social projects. And we make long-term deals like soccer championship, celebrating Belgian football, some joint initiatives between the government and the business. Next, human resources. We're aware that we have a high quality engineering resources, and investors are interested having skilled human resources. That is why we need to be cognizant of what specifically business requires in terms of human resources. That is why we created a system which unites universities, businesses, and the government. This platform allows to train required to build required skills and professions for business needs. We know that some regions are understaffed. Some make plans in the near term, but we try to do this in the long term. Long term means currently 7-year period. People are in our focus. Our people are our main customer, and we do our best to improve their life. Lipetsk region is considered to be the best digitally mature region. This means this speed of response to requests of people, which reduce multiple times. We have transparent procedures to get benefits for small businesses, and in terms of the region's openness, we are on top positions. This is our team. I was asked in the chat box how we came to the idea that we need to go toward ESG. You see the entire team on that slide all came from Sber. We always pledge for improvement, sought by people, business and people. These are our major clients, and we hope that our strategy will be supported by the investment community. Please come to us as investors or just as tourists. We have a lot of facilities. You will like it. Thank you very much, Eugenia. And we've seen your invitation on the slide of the Russian-German Commercial Chamber announcing a recent visit. And now I'm pleased to introduce next speaker, Andrey Betin, Deputy Head of the Nizhny Novgorod region, who's going to talk about.
Good afternoon. There is probably a trend for small technical hiccups, but of course that will not prevent us from doing this. Greetings to all speakers and participants of this event. You know, I will now run a short presentation, but having listened to my colleagues, to Eugenia and Sean, I understand that today we are far more in depth than we try to show. After listening to Sean, I realized that both regions and companies have long been inside this agenda, and we didn't start working on sustainable development because somebody invented them, but because this was the sensible. I'd like to say that a couple years ago, this ranking was of no interest for the regions, but we now see a certain peak in demand, and we see that regions and top companies are interested in certain achievements, in certain parameters. So, and when a rating creates conditions, or conditions create a ranking, then we really, when people's life in a particular region or country is improving, for us, we decide that the ESG model can be applied to governing a Russian region. And we thought whether it's a remote future or is it tomorrow. And together with RAEX-Europe and the Sberbank, we worked on a model for about a year, or for a whole year, a model which has 22 key factors. It has both advantages and disadvantages and development areas for the Nizhny Novgorod region. So we started this, we clearly identified the mission of regional and municipal authorities. It was very easy to think that we already do a lot. We have targeted investment programs, and we could simply repackage them for each of the ESG letters and say that we are within the ESG agenda. But when working with RAEX and Sberbank, who I would like to sincerely thank today, we made quite a lot of work. We realized that imitation would not get us anywhere. We understood that ESG is philosophy and culture. So as Eugenia already said, so it's a triple interface between government of the region, business, and people of the region. So only once you engage all of the three components, you'll get some significant results. So then we saw the synergies that each of the focus areas, environment, social, or governance, the ESG concept allows to reinforce them and have a much bigger effect when all the three components are packed together. So in terms of environmental rankings, the Nizhny Novgorod region was in top 3 of the green ranking, which is made by PPK RAEO with the Russian government in terms of municipal waste management, talking about environmental damage, we've had more than 5 billion rubles of funding to recultivate 7 landfills, and if we talk about social sphere, one of the parameters in the index doesn't look significant at first glance, but then when we looked more in depth, is the number of school children studying in second shift. So quite soon, by 2024, this will become a thing of the past, because we plan to build 9 new schools, and it will solve the problem of present-day school children. That means that they will be able to study in the morning and have some additional classes in the afternoon. So when we started putting all this together, we realized that in business, from my point of view, from the point of view of a regional official, in business is quite simple. You have social responsibility of a corporation, you have environmental responsibility, you have the green shift, and you have corporate governance. And this is all quite obvious. And it's been under development for several years. And during the first session, we talked about green financing, and this gives a very good push to the corporate sector. But when we talk about regional or municipal authorities, there is a lot of problems there. How do you identify yourself? Where do you start? How do you know which development areas are there? How do you communicate this to the people? If I just leave my office now, if I ask 10 people that I meet, maybe 2 out of 10 in the best case scenario will say that they have heard these magic letters. All the rest will not have no idea what we're talking about. So it's important to communicate this to the people, so that becomes of the philosophy of life. We have identified a Russian name for the ESG model is the land of our children. So when we clearly understand that today we do our best in order to make sure that it's not worse tomorrow, and that may be the goal for the regional or municipal, or maybe sometime in the future for federal authorities. And it's important that part of this our educational activities, our communication activities, I think it's important to be mindful, to be conscious about what we do. Sometimes we stick to specific projects and specific KPIs of this particular project, but we have to be conscious about improving life in a particular region or city or particular place. And I'd like to note Peter Gruber says that strategy is culture of tomorrow. I've already talked about the governance, and we saw the most significant effect, and it's an overarching effect. And it was even before we had a conscious choice of ESG development as a region. And we would really like to see more region follow suit. And it became clear that the main regulator is the government employees or municipal officials. So, but when they do not understand the purpose of what they do, it is very difficult to have any progress. So, starting in 2018, we introduced the transparency culture, which allowed us to have a very transparent selection of people for the highest positions in the regional government, like deputy governors. And we understood that our transparency culture was insufficient. And we established the Center of Transformation. It's a corporate university of the government of the Novgorod region. And it's the acronym for this is KUPNO, and KUPNO Zlidina is the symbol of the motto of the fight of 1612 that preserved the Russian statehood. So this transformation center develops many of the ideas, and it has an ESG laboratory, and its task is to learn from best Russian international practices and incorporate them in the region. The next thing is improvement culture. To a certain extent, the lean technologies overlap with ESG to a certain extent, and it made it easier for us to speak to our colleagues in business. But of course, the most important factor is the cooperation culture, and this is something that we try to establish a full-fledged ESG platform, which will be like a foundation for the changes that we're planning. And the cooperation has not been easy. And give you an example in terms of human resources development in the region. We see throughout the world and in Russia that there is a lack of skilled labor, and it's only increasing. Therefore, last year we established a project office with the involvement of 25 largest companies in the region, and we are now finalizing the human resources strategy for the region, and this makes it possible for us to be in the same boat. See, this was a first precedent of real cooperation, and now we see that there is a history of cooperation. So each Russian municipality or region competes with each other to a certain extent. So I think the ESG agenda is the agenda of openness, which will help regions unite in achieving specific goals. So when we talk about the environmental or climate agenda, sure enough, this is not a task of one region or one country. It's a universal task that needs to be done on a global scale. So out of the model that we built together with RAEX and Sberbank, we established strategic priorities, and this resulted in a document called Strategy of Nizhny Novgorod Region, developed in 2018. So many of the things in that strategy, they do overlap with the ESG agenda, and we are now reworking this strategy together with the people of the region in order to identify strategic priorities and move towards their achievements. So it's important to note all of these three components interact and reinforce each other. Here, I would like to show you some beautiful paintings. We have a unique contemporary artist. He is making up such beautiful landscapes. Is it beautiful or is it terrifying? Some people see beauty and some people are terrified by such sights. So I think it's time for us to be afraid of our future and future of our children. So the future development of planet Earth will depend on how united we are now. It may sound very very ideal, but this is the goals that we set forth in front of ourselves in the government of Nizhny Novgorod region. Thank you very much, Andrey. Eugenia already spoke a lot about the cooperation between the Lipetsk region and businesses. What do you think about what can be done? How you can involve businesses more into the ESG agenda of the region? Well, I mentioned the platform. In the end of last year and early this year, we tried to sit at the same table with the business, and it became clear that time has come when you don't have to decide who is the leader and who is being led. It's no longer important. It's important to have the competences in place, and we have looked at the companies that have been towards the ESG agenda for a number of years now. We have a number of companies for whom ESG is the core principle. They are not only changing themselves, but also the municipality they are located in. And if we look at the wages, average wage at this company is 50,000 rubles. Average wage across the municipality is 40,000 people, and it's about 1,800 people that are employed by the company, and it's about 50,000 people in the municipality. So this company creates like a subculture that is followed by the authorities. So a company is a channel to promote ESG philosophy. Because if you have a large company that creates a certain culture, it has an impact on its suppliers at the lower level. So in a situation like this, that it is difficult for the regional authorities to influence the small businesses because they count money. If they see that it makes it's profitable, they will do it. But if it's not, they will not do it. But it's up to the consumer. It's the consumer who drives this trend now. So large manufacturers are already living within this ESG concept. So you have this chain between the large business all the way down to suppliers and consumers. So in this case, we as authorities are there to help. So despite the pandemic of the past 2 years, we provided about 2 billion rubles worth of support to the small and medium-sized businesses that have been affected by the pandemic. And that's a model that we're trying to convey to the consumers. So all of us, regardless of the position we take in this life, we are the consumers in this life, and we can impact the future of our children. So during session 1 today, we discussed what was important for the business, how business looks at its suppliers, and of course ESG is very much in the forefront. And we move on to our next speaker. It's Alexey Parabuchev, head of Moscow Agency of Innovations.
Thank you very much, Svetlana, for your introduction. I'm glad to see all of you at this webinar, and I agree with all speakers who outlined the ESG agenda importance for regions and cities. And I'd like to focus on a very specific aspect, which is often underestimated. However, it is a very essential in terms of promoting ESG agenda by large companies and corporations. Today, we discussed a lot of tools for promoting ESG agenda, which can be split in 3 categories. Financial tools, and Moscow is one of the most exemplary case issuing green bonds. In addition to green financing, cities provide benefits linked to ESG. In some cases, penalties can be regarded as financing instrument as well. We discussed we reviewed how cities worldwide approach financing tools, and this tool is one of the most elaborated. Second category is regulations, including certification of business, certification of procurement, green procurement. Moscow also applies this approach to favor green companies. And the third category, which will be in focus of my speech, is the cultural aspect, which includes raising awareness, disclosure, and innovations, as they also relate to an important parameter of the ESG agenda. Russia and Moscow in particular have a big segment of companies who mostly startups who are working on solutions to be used as for urban and corporate ESG projects in all three areas: environmental, social, and corporate. As we've already discussed. This year, in 2021, a consolidated ranking was issued for the first time, which assessed innovations worldwide. The author was a Munich-based rating company, and Moscow was in top 3 by level of innovations. What does it mean? Development and introduction of solutions, both for cleaner environment and social development, is one of the key aspects. Apparently, we will be incapable to reach our objectives if we are not innovative. So that means that we need to support startups who develop innovations. Otherwise, we will be dependent on import of solutions from other segments and countries, which is the case of Dubai, who is drawing like a magnet tech startups to develop ESG solutions based on urban infrastructure. Or we can facilitate developing such startups in Russia and in Moscow in particular. That was the option which Moscow chose. Tech startups are developing ESG solutions get additional motivation and benefits. In essence, Moscow's second rank in their rating means that a lot of solutions are developed. To be more specific, we have some 350 companies, and which is 9% from corporate sector in general. And these companies have access to urban infrastructure to go live in the city. We have a number of pilot testing grounds in Moscow, which gradually cover all infrastructure. These testing grounds include zero-emission buildings, electric cars, hydrocars, and other vehicles, healthcare, education, protection of biodiversity, and environment. I'm not going to name them all. All these systems are essential for urban life, controlled by Moscow government, as well as for the corporate sector, including banking, retail. For pilot testing grounds, accessible for all of them, providing an accelerated testing facilities oriented toward sustainable development. In 2021, we tested some 30 innovations linked to ESG. This helps to reduce time to market. I mean, innovations going live commercially. These testing grounds help to evaluate efficiency and promptly commission them on the commercial scale. And this helps us to have the required infrastructure for an ESG. For an ESG breakthrough, Moscow was on top of ranking in terms of development of ESG initiatives, as Moscow helps companies to have accelerated testing of innovations. Just testing is not enough. However, we need next steps, which we need to discuss with other regions. Next steps include venture finance, venture funds, VC, targeting ESG technologies. The second thing is benefits for companies developing ESG solutions, as well as private capital. I'm not talking about large infrastructural projects, but about startup solutions. Or with no development, with no support for development and going to the market, will not have will have development of infrastructure stalled due to the deficit of tech solutions. Globally, cities and regions who are systematic in translating ESG agenda into specific strategies are very few. We see a good start in preparing an ESG strategy in the cases presented today. Speaking of which, Russia is at the forefront of promoting the ESG agenda by regions. The United States, Canada, Europe cannot be proud of that many cities having their own strategies. Let me make a remark here. Nizhny Novgorod region, supported by SBER, reviewed ESG strategies, and we identified some 200 strategies worldwide. However, this is a tiny figure globally, meaning that only few realize that we need to strategize. Yes, that is what I am talking about. Very few city councils have ESG strategies. To sum up, I'd like to say that Moscow has a lot of potential for development, innovations, and ESG strategy are intrinsically linked, and we cannot talk about ESG agenda if we do not talk about sources feeding tech development, fed by tech companies, startups, VCs who help to who provide for accelerated time to market. Those additional tools constructing this infrastructural basis for further development. So we need to pay a lot of attention to this cultural parameter of ESG agenda, and Moscow is about to prepare a legal framework regulating its further steps. Thank you very much for your speech. To summarize, I'd like to ask a question to all participants. Often we discuss ESG statistics of the regions, which is an essential condition for further rankings. How can we improve quality of disclosure? What can we do?
Sean, I hope you heard the first part of the question translated, but just in case I will repeat it. So we have a big problem with ESG data available for regions. So this data is needed for comparison of regions, ESG ratings, rankings, and strategy building. So what is international experience? How to promote these disclosures? How to ensure that disclosures are of good quality?
Svetlana, I'm going to dive in because you did ask the question in English, so I guess I'm on the hook here to give them. I'm going to say that there's a lot of data involved in ESG, and there's a lot of different methodologies and a lot of different approaches. Our colleagues on the panel today will have some ideas around that. I'm not an expert on social and governance data. There's a lot around about that. My area of focus is environmental, and what we've done in the last few years is developed a slightly different approach to addressing the environmental data requirements than has existed in the past. It's not a best-in-class approach. there are absolutes. For example, in the Russian taxonomy and the European taxonomy, there's an absolute measure of emissions for electricity generation. So if you're someone who has assets or projects in that area, you simply need to meet the criteria published in the taxonomy passed by the Duma. That's very simple, very straightforward. Now, getting that data, well, the company needs to provide that data and will really most likely need to get an independent review of that data. But the company generally has that data, they just haven't calculated it. In other areas, let's say property, where in the European and the taxonomy of other countries, there is a measurement of energy efficiency or emissions efficiency of buildings required. That data can be calculated by the building owner to meet the published public criteria, and then banks, they can provide it to banks or provide it to real estate trusts. But there would be benefits in having a common labeling scheme. One thing that the region could do, working with Moscow authorities, is to look at what is a emissions and energy efficiency labeling scheme improvement across the region that could dovetail with the taxonomy criteria that sit there now. So we can tell what is, let's say, a green building in the region, and therefore that can be linked to green loans or green bonds or green finance or one sort or another. So there's certainly work to be done. A lot of that is work at regulation level against the public criteria. In other areas, and we're a member of the Future of Sustainable Data Alliance, which is a global coalition with people like Refinitiv and Bloomberg and FTSE in developing data. There is certainly work to be done in capturing and making available data. But I'm going to say the environmental thing, it's fairly straightforward now that we've established clear minimum criteria for issuers then to calculate the data that's required. It's not complicated, it's not a best-in-class issue, whereas in the social governance, it's slightly more complicated because there's a lot more relativity involved in developing it. I hope that makes sense. I'll be very curious to see what Alexey and Dmitry think about this question.
Thank you. Dmitry, I had a microphone to you. What is your view?
Я согласен с Шоном.
I agree with Sean with regard to measuring parameters for green financial instruments. Russian taxonomy and international taxonomies clearly say what needs to be measured, and companies do that accordingly. And if they need to, they bring along an independent auditor who verifies that emissions per unit of product is such and such. That is required by investors. But in my presentation, I also mentioned sustainability-linked bonds and measuring regional progress in terms of sustainable development. And if you remember, I spoke about the quality of life index that was developed based on OECD methodologies. Together, it was developed by VEB with PwC. As I said, there are 20 parameters that are monitored. Each parameter has a score. If we look into the housing parameter, for example, there is a sub-parameter, average cost of 1 square meter of housing on a housing market. Or if we look at another parameter, income, the Gini index, the index of disposable income. The source for that is Rostat, mobility, number of vehicles per 100 people. So, and the source of data would be the traffic police and Rostat. So you collect all those parameters, you score them, and all of that can be monitored from year to year. And this is an excellent source based on international approaches that you can use to measure region's progress in sustainable development. I don't see if Eugenia is still with us. Eugenia, are you there? Yes, same question for you. How do you think you can stimulate regions to improve their non-financial disclosure. Your region is quite well off in that sense, but how do you think you can stimulate other regions to better disclose information? It's a very good question. And we actually encountered that this issue when we were developing our own strategy. We understand that there's quite a lot of information that's publicly available, but each region needs to provide some additional information about itself. So I think you can use two approaches, bottom-top approach and top-to-bottom. We have 85 regions in Russia, and it takes time to change the mindset of 85 regions. But we can be very, we can do it well when we have a single standard, a single metrics, and approved metrics. Of course, each region has its own mindset, but I think in the coming, in the near future, we are going to have like 20, up to 20 regions that would be conscious enough about that. But of course, we'd like to have as many regions as possible. So I think you can do it through a single standard and through some federal support. So Andrey, what do you think about stimulating disclosure? I think it's about being conscious. So what is open data is something that you want to communicate. So when we talk about metrics, so you need to make sure you need to change the approaches from penalties to rewards. We have a Russian saying that the fish rots from its head, but we say fish moves with its head first. So we say that we are ready to hear about the bad stuff, but at the same time, we are prepared to make improvements. So the idea is that you need to be able to disclose data, and that data may be bad, but you need to be sure that you won't be reprimanded for disclosing bad data. So disclosure of new data can lead to a social turmoil. We made a decision that we would have an outdoor air analysis system throughout the region. We have stationary stations and mobile units in order to see the air quality by the end of the year. This was our conscious choice. Definitely, we're going to have some difficulties there, but when you're open about this, when you communicate this to the people, so that makes it possible to do it together with the businesses that are a source of emissions, of pollution. So it's important to show that being transparent is good, it's not bad. And that only improves your positions in the future. I think that's the approach we should take. So, Alexey, your answer to that in conclusion. I would join my colleagues in that. What's important here is to have an internal policy of working with the regions and their readiness to have their data to make their data transparent, because without that readiness we will not have data that we could use for comparison. But it's important to have a unified or uniform methodology to collect how we collect these data. So actually, RAEX was involved in a project about collecting data for their ranking And I think there are different tools within that methodology, but I think it should be a single set, a uniform set of guidelines that help regions to establish their data acquisition, data collection systems, because open data is not so much about the fact that the regions do not want to show something, but it's about the fact that these data which would be actualized or they simply don't exist. So we need a system in place. Like Andrey was talking about the air quality system to collect this data, process this data, and make them accessible for decision makers. And in order to be able to do a benchmarking, I think this is an issue that we need to look into if we want to have accurate data for making governance decisions. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the speakers and special thanks
for our session. And я хотела бы напомнить всем слушателям, что
and I would like to remind all attendees that we are going to discuss the transparency of methodology for ESG rankings, because there is a growing demand for a fair comparison of all regions. We have opened this methodology for public consultation. We are prepared to tell how we are making up this ranking, what's involved. The first meeting on this subject will take place next Wednesday. Please stay updated via our Telegram channel. Once again, thanks very much to all our speakers and participants. Thanks to the interpreters who have been interpreting this. Thanks to everyone who has supported this event, the Lipetsk region, Polus, and Russian-German Chamber of Commerce. Thank you.
Lipetsk region, a region in the center of the European part of Russia. The region is located in close proximity to Moscow, and the country's most important transport arteries pass through it. Federal highways M4 Don and P22 Caspian. The ports of St. Petersburg, the Black Sea, and the EU border are 1,000 kilometers away. The average annual freight turnover of railway transport is 8,600 million tons. Lipetsk region is one of the leading regions of the Russian Federation in terms of investment attractiveness. According to the quality of life rating, the region is among the top 10. There are excellent opportunities for implementing projects in the fields of industry, agriculture, and food. Many well-known companies appreciated the advantages of investment opportunities and found a reliable and successful partner in the Lipetsk region. We provide investors with a large selection of technologically equipped platforms, special economic zone, industrial parks, brownfield, technology parks. In industrial and production clusters, there are 11 directions for creating clusters on the territory of the Lipetsk region. The industry of the region produces competitive products exported to more than 120 countries of the world: Italy, Germany, Ukraine, China, Poland, Netherlands, Brazil. We are one of the first regions in Russia to launch an export accelerator. We have something to offer the investor. The investor receives project support, state support, tax benefits, customs benefits, qualified workers and management personnel, developed banking infrastructure and modern technologies. Our experience in working with projects, the speed and quality of their execution and implementation, a comfortable environment for investors. All this guarantees the success of your business. Lipetsk region is open for your business. Department of Investment and Innovation of the Lipetsk region.